Success is often loud. At least, that's what we are taught to believe. We see people celebrating, talking about their achievements, sharing their progress, showing their results, and slowly, we begin to think that success must look like that. Visible, clear, recognized. But what if real success doesn't begin that way? What if it starts quietly, in moments no one sees, in choices no one notices, in habits that don't look impressive, but slowly change everything? This is not a story about talent, not a story about luck, not even a story about working harder than everyone else. This is a story about something much simpler and much easier to ignore. Quiet habits. The kind of habits that don't get attention, the kind of habits that don't feel powerful in the moment. But over time, they build something strong, something stable, something real. The first habit was something I didn't even realize I was developing. It didn't have a name. It didn't feel like a strategy. It just started as a reaction, a response to discomfort. At that time, I often compared myself to others. People around me seemed faster, smarter, more confident. They spoke better. They made decisions quickly. They seemed to know exactly what they were doing. And I felt slower, more uncertain, more careful. At first, I saw this as a weakness, something I needed to fix, something that made me less capable. Because in a fast world, being slow feels like falling behind. But something interesting happened. Instead of forcing myself to become faster, I started doing something else. I started paying attention, not in a big way, not in a structured way, just quietly. When someone spoke, I listened fully, not just to their words, but to how they spoke, why they spoke that way, what they were trying to say, and what they were not saying. When I made a mistake, I didn't immediately move on. I stayed with it. I asked myself, what happened here? What did I miss? What can I understand from this? It was not comfortable. In fact, it was often frustrating because it took time and it didn't give immediate results. While others were moving forward quickly, I felt like I was staying in the same place, thinking, observing, reflecting. But slowly, something began to change. I started noticing patterns, small details, subtle signals, things that I had never seen before. I began to understand people better, not just what they said, but what they meant. I began to understand situations more clearly, not just what was happening, but why it was happening. And most importantly, I began to understand myself, my reactions, my habits, my mistakes. This quiet awareness became something powerful, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. While others relied on speed, I began to rely on clarity. While others reacted quickly, I started responding carefully. And over time, that made a difference. Not a loud difference, not something people noticed right away, but something that showed up in results. Better decisions, fewer repeated mistakes, more meaningful conversations, and something else that I didn't expect. Confidence. Not the kind that comes from speaking loudly, but the kind that comes from understanding deeply. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself, because it is built on something real. That was the first quiet habit. Paying attention. Not just looking, but truly seeing. Not just hearing, but truly listening. It sounds simple, almost too simple, but in a world full of noise, very few people actually do it. Most people are distracted, rushed, focused on the next thing, always moving, always reacting, but rarely fully present, and that creates an opportunity, not an obvious one. Not something you can see immediately, but a quiet advantage. Because when you pay attention, you begin to see what others miss. And when you see what others miss, you can do what others don't. You can avoid mistakes. You can understand deeper. You can move with intention instead of just movement. Looking back, I realized something important. This habit didn't make me successful overnight. It didn't change everything at once, but it changed how I approached everything. And that changed the results. Not loudly, not quickly, but quietly, and in a way that lasted. Because success that is built quietly is often the kind that stays. As you listen to this story, I want you to think about something simple. How often are you truly paying attention? Not just to your work, not just to your goals, but to the small details, the quiet signals, the subtle patterns in your life. Because maybe the difference you are looking for is not in doing more, but in seeing more, in slowing down just enough to notice what is already there. This is only the beginning. There are other quiet habits, just as simple, just as easy to ignore, and just as powerful. But everything starts here, with attention, with awareness, with the decision to be present in a world that is always trying to pull you away. The second habit did not look impressive either. It didn't make me stand out. It didn't make people notice me. In fact, most people probably thought I was doing less than them. And because this habit was about something very simple, doing fewer things, but doing them better. At that time, I was like many people around me, busy, always doing something, always trying to keep up, always adding more tasks, more goals, more responsibilities. It felt productive. It felt like progress. But deep inside, it also felt scattered, like I was moving, but not really going anywhere. I would start something, then quickly move to the next thing, not because I finished, but because something else felt urgent. Something else felt more important. And at the end of the day, I was tired, but not satisfied, because I had done many things, but completed very little. That was the pattern. Until one day, something small happened. I was working on a simple task, not difficult, not important, just something I needed to finish. And as usual, my attention started to move, a notification, a new idea, another task waiting, and I almost followed it. I almost left before finishing, but for some reason, I paused just for a moment, and I asked myself, what happens if I just finish this one thing? Not perfectly, not quickly, just completely. So I stayed. I ignored the distraction. I returned to the task, and slowly, I finished it. It took more time than I expected, more focus than I was used to, but when it was done, something felt different. Not big, not dramatic, but clear. A sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction, and that feeling was new. Because I realized I didn't feel that very often. Most of my days were filled with unfinished things, half-done tasks, interrupted thoughts, broken focus. But this felt whole. That moment changed something small, but important. The next day, I tried it again. Just one task, one focus, finish it, then move on. It wasn't easy. My mind still wanted to jump, to switch, to escape, because that's what it was used to. But slowly, I trained it. Not by forcing, but by returning again and again, back to the same task, back to the same focus. And over time, something shifted. I started doing less, but completing more. I started choosing tasks more carefully. Not everything felt urgent anymore. Not everything felt necessary. Because I began to see something clearly. Being busy is not the same as being effective. Doing more is not the same as achieving more. And this is where the quiet habit began to grow. Instead of asking, "What else can I do today?" I started asking, "What actually matters today?" And that question changed everything because it forced me to choose, to prioritize, to let go of things that didn't really move me forward. At first, this felt uncomfortable because saying no feels like losing something, opportunities, possibilities. But over time, I realized something important. Every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else, to your time, to your energy, to your focus. And if you are not careful, you end up saying yes to too many things that don't matter and no to the things that actually do. So I started protecting my focus, not perfectly, not strictly, but intentionally. When I worked, I tried to really work, not multitask, not divide my attention, just be there with the task, with the moment. And slowly, my work improved. Not because I was more talented, not because I worked longer hours, but because I was present, because I finished what I started, because I gave each task the attention it needed. And people began to notice something, not immediately, but over time. They noticed that when I did something, it was complete, reliable, thoughtful. They noticed that I didn't rush, but I didn't delay either. I moved at a steady pace, and that created trust because consistency is something people feel, even if they don't talk about it. This habit also changed something deeper. It changed how I experienced time. Before, time always felt limited, not enough, always running out. But now, time felt different, not longer, but clearer. Because instead of dividing it into many small pieces, I gave it fully to fewer things. And that made each moment more meaningful, more focused, more real. This is the second quiet habit, focusing deeply on fewer things. It doesn't look impressive. It doesn't create noise, but it creates results. The kind of results that build slowly and last. Because when you do something fully, you don't just complete it. You understand it, you improve it, you grow from it. And over time, that growth becomes visible, not suddenly, but clearly. As you listen, I want you to think about your own day. How many things are you trying to do at the same time? How often do you start something and leave it unfinished? How often does your attention move before your work is complete? Because maybe the problem is not that you need more time. Maybe you need more focus, more intention, more completion. And maybe if you begin with just one thing, one task, one moment of full attention, you will start to feel the difference. Quietly, but powerfully. This is how change often begins. Not with something big, but with something small, done completely. And from there, everything else starts to align. The third habit was even quieter than the first two. No one could see it. No one could measure it. And for a long time, I didn't even realize I was practicing it because it didn't feel like a habit. It felt like waiting. Not the kind of waiting that feels passive, not the kind that feels lazy, but a different kind. A deliberate pause. At that time, I used to react quickly. If something happened, I responded immediately. If someone said something, I answered right away. If I felt something, I acted on it. It felt natural. It felt efficient. And in many situations, it worked. But in other situations, it didn't. Sometimes I said things, I later wished I had not said. Sometimes I made decisions that felt right in the moment, but wrong later. Sometimes I reacted emotionally instead of thoughtfully, and the problem was not obvious because nothing felt wrong. In the moment, everything felt justified, reasonable, immediate. But over time, I began to notice a pattern. The moments I regretted were often the moments I reacted too quickly, without space, without reflection, without distance. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant something simple. I was not always in control of my reactions. They were automatic, fast, unfiltered. So I tried something different. The next time I felt a strong reaction, I didn't act immediately. I paused, just for a few seconds. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible. Just a small space between feeling and action. At first, it felt strange, almost unnatural, because my mind wanted to move, to respond, to react. But I held that space just a little longer. And in that space, something interesting happened. The feeling changed, not completely, but slightly. It became less intense, less urgent. And with that came clarity. Instead of reacting, I could choose. Instead of following the first impulse, I could consider another response. Not always a better one, but a more intentional one. That small pause became powerful, not because it removed emotion, but because it gave me distance from it. And distance creates perspective. Over time, I began to use this habit in more situations, not just in conversations, but in decisions, in challenges, in moments of pressure. Whenever something felt urgent, I asked myself a simple question: do I need to respond now? And often, the answer was no. I could wait, I could think, I could return to the situation with a clearer mind. This didn't mean avoiding decisions. It didn't mean delaying everything. It meant choosing the right moment to act. And that made a difference because many mistakes are not caused by lack of knowledge. They are caused by lack of space. No pause, no reflection, just reaction. And reaction is often driven by emotion, by fear, by pressure, by habit. But when you create space, you step out of that pattern. You move from automatic to intentional. And that shift is quiet, but powerful. People started noticing something, not what I was doing, but how I was doing it. They noticed that I didn't rush, that I didn't react immediately, that I took a moment before responding. And that created something unexpected: trust. Because when someone pauses, it shows care, it shows thoughtfulness, it shows that their response is not random, it is considered. And that changes how people see you, not as someone who is fast, but as someone who is reliable, someone who thinks, someone who chooses. And over time, that becomes a form of quiet strength. This habit also changed something inside me. Before, I felt controlled by situations, by what happened around me, by what people said, by what I felt. But now, I felt different, not in control of everything, but in control of my response. And that is a powerful place to be, because life will always bring challenges, unexpected moments, difficult emotions, things you cannot control. But your response, that is where your power is. And that power often begins with something very small: a pause, just a few seconds, just enough time to choose. This is the third quiet habit: creating space before responding. It doesn't make you slower, it makes you clearer. It doesn't make you passive, it makes you intentional. And in a world where everything is fast, That clarity is rare. As you listen, I want you to notice something simple. The next time you feel something strongly, anger, pressure, excitement, pause. Just for a moment. You don't need to do anything else. Just notice. Just wait and see what changes. Because in that small space, you might discover something important. You are not your first reaction. You are the one who chooses what happens next. And that choice, quiet as it may be, can change everything. The fourth habit looked like doing nothing. At least, that's how it appeared from the outside. No visible action, no clear movement, no immediate result, just stillness. And in a world that values speed, stillness can look like weakness. It can look like a lack of ambition, a lack of effort. But what I discovered was something very different. This habit was about being comfortable with not knowing. At that time, I always wanted answers, clear ones, fast ones. I wanted to understand everything quickly, to make decisions with certainty, to feel sure about what I was doing. And when I didn't have that clarity, I felt uncomfortable, restless, uneasy. So I tried to fix it. I searched for more information, asked more people, thought more, hoping that eventually everything would become clear. But often, it didn't. Sometimes, the more I searched, the more confused I became. More options, more perspectives, more possibilities. And instead of clarity, I felt overwhelmed. That's when I started noticing something. Not everything needs an immediate answer. Not everything becomes clear through more thinking. Some things become clear with time, with experience, with space. But to allow that, you have to be willing to stay in uncertainty. And that is not easy because uncertainty feels like a problem, something to solve, something to remove. But what if uncertainty is not the problem? What if it is part of the process? That idea changed something in me. The next time I felt uncertain, I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't immediately search for answers. I paused, and instead of asking, how do I solve this right now? I asked, what if I just stay with this for a while? Not forever, not passively, just for a moment. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like standing in a place, without direction, without movement, but slowly, something shifted. The pressure disappeared. The need to decide immediately became softer, and in that softer space, clarity began to appear, not suddenly, not completely, but gradually, like a fog, slowly lifting. I began to see things differently, not because I forced clarity, but because I allowed it. And that made my decisions better. Not faster, not easier, but deeper, more aligned, more thoughtful. I also noticed something else. When I rushed to find answers, I often chose the most obvious one, the easiest one, the most immediate one. But when I allowed time, new possibilities appeared. Options I hadn't considered, perspectives I hadn't seen, because my mind had space to explore. This habit didn't mean doing nothing forever. It didn't mean avoiding decisions. And it meant choosing the right moment to decide and trusting that moment when it comes. People around me often seemed certain, confident, quick, and for a long time, I thought that was strength. But now, I see something different. True confidence doesn't always rush. It doesn't need to prove itself through speed. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, until things become clear. And that kind of confidence is not loud. It doesn't attract attention, but it creates stability because decisions made with clarity tend to last. They don't need to be changed often. They don't create unnecessary problems. They move things forward in the right direction. This habit also changed how I experienced doubt. Before, doubt felt like failure, like something was wrong, like I didn't know enough or wasn't good enough. But now, I see doubt differently, as a signal, a sign that something needs attention, not panic, not immediate action, but attention, understanding, and sometimes time. That shift made a big difference because instead of fighting doubt, I learned to sit with it, to listen, to explore. And through that, it often transformed into clarity, or at least into better questions. And better questions often lead to better answers. This is the fourth quiet habit, being comfortable with not knowing. It doesn't look powerful. It doesn't feel productive, but it creates something important, space. And in that space, clarity grows. As you listen, I want you to think about something simple. Is there something in your life right now that feels unclear? A decision you are trying to make, a direction you are unsure about, and maybe you are trying very hard to find the answer, to force clarity, to decide quickly, but what if you don't need to decide right now? What if you can wait just a little, just enough to let things settle, to let your thoughts become clearer, to let your understanding deepen? Because sometimes the best decision is not the fastest one. It is the one that comes after you have allowed yourself to not know. And in that quiet space, you may discover something unexpected. Clarity, that doesn't need to be forced. Direction, that feels natural. And a sense of calm, that tells you are ready. The fifth habit was something I used to avoid, not because it was difficult, but because it was uncomfortable. It didn't require effort, it didn't require skill. It required something else, honesty, not with others, but with myself. At that time, I believed I was honest. I didn't lie. I didn't hide things from people. So in my mind, I was already doing enough. But slowly, I began to realize something different. There is a kind of honesty that is much harder, much quieter, and much more important. The honesty you practice when no one is watching. The honesty that doesn't protect your ego. The honesty that doesn't try to make you feel better, but shows you the truth as it is. I noticed this one day after making a mistake. It wasn't a big mistake, nothing serious, just something small that didn't go well. And immediately, my mind began to explain it. It wasn't your fault. The situation was unclear. You didn't have enough time. All of these things were partly true, but something felt incomplete because deep down, I knew there was more. So instead of moving on, I paused and I asked myself a simple question. What is the real reason this happened? Not the comfortable answer, not the easy explanation, the real one. At first, nothing came because my mind was used to protecting me, to giving me reasons that felt safe, but I stayed with the question, quietly, patiently, and slowly. Something surfaced, a small truth. I hadn't prepared enough. I had rushed, I had assumed things. And because of that, the result was not good. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant something simple. I was responsible, not completely, not entirely, but partly. And for a moment, I wanted to avoid that feeling, to return to the easier explanation, to move on quickly. But I didn't. I stayed with it. And something interesting happened. The discomfort did not grow. It softened. because alongside it came clarity, and with clarity came something else, improvement, because now I knew what to change. I knew what to do differently, and that was the beginning of a new habit. Instead of avoiding truth, I started looking for it, not in a harsh way, not in a critical way, but in an honest way. Whenever something didn't go well, I asked, what part of this is mine? Not to blame myself, but to understand. Because understanding creates growth. Blame does not. This habit changed how I saw everything. Success was no longer something external, something I could achieve and show. It became something internal, something I could build quietly through awareness, through honesty. Because when you are honest with yourself, you don't repeat the same mistakes. You don't stay in the same patterns. You see them clearly. And when you see them, you can change them. This also changed how I experienced failure. Before, failure felt heavy, personal, negative, something to avoid. But now, it felt different. Not easy, not pleasant, but useful. Because every failure contained information, not obvious, not always clear, but there. And honesty was the key to finding it. Without honesty, failure is just pain. With honesty, failure becomes a lesson. And lessons build progress, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. People often think success comes from doing things right, but in my experience, it often comes from understanding what went wrong. And that understanding requires honesty, not once, not occasionally, but consistently, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges how you see yourself, even when it shows you things you would rather not see, because those things are often the most important. This is the fifth quiet habit, being honest with yourself. It doesn't look impressive, it doesn't create attention, but it creates something deeper, self-awareness. And self-awareness is the foundation of real growth. As you listen, I want you to think about something simple. The last time something didn't go as planned, what did you tell yourself? Did you explain it away? Did you move on quickly? Or did you pause and look deeper? Because maybe there is something there waiting to be understood, not to make you feel bad, but to help you grow. And if you are willing to be honest, even just a little, you might discover something important, not about the situation, but about yourself. And that discovery, quiet as it may be, can change everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If this story made you think, even for a moment, then take that moment with you. Let it stay. And if you want to continue this journey of learning English through calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe and return for the next part, because sometimes the most powerful changes happen quietly.